What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here again today for another career on the career video train that we just keep rolling on. Today we have another head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks who coached from 2005 through 2008. And he's not really remembered for being a head coach. That's because he's the Hockey Hall of Famer, Denis Savard. Denis Savard is a Blackhawks legend, and we all know this if you know hockey. And he was the guy that my parents grew up watching. I mean, my parents grew up, they were really young in the early 70s, so they really started watching, my dad especially started watching in the early 80s, and who was drafted in the 1980 NHL draft? Denis Savard. He's taken third overall in 1980, which caused some controversy at the time because everyone thought Montreal was going to take the French-born player, as he was called, sometimes Savoir Faire, so pardon my French. But he drops to third to the Chicago Blackhawks as Montreal takes Doug Wickenheiser. I forgot who drafted second, but I forgot who it was, I knew the name, but wasn't very familiar. But Denis Savard is taken third overall by Chicago in 1980, and has one hell of a career. He's played in his rookie year with the Blackhawks in 1980-81. 76 games played, 28 goals, 47 assists, 75 points. He sets the new Blackhawk record in points as a rookie. He's fifth in Calder voting. 3 games played in the playoffs, no goals, no assists, no points. But put a pretty good start to his career, I would say. And I did something different. I did something where if he was top 10 in points, I put it down. If he was top 10 in a specific trophy for voting, I put it down. I probably should have done that for Bobby Hall as well. I only really put it if he won, but he had so many accolades that there was kind of just too much. And he most of the time led the league in goals anyway, so that was just kind of obvious. So from now on, if there's a really good player like this, I'll write down what they are, like goals, assists, points, if it's top 10, or if they're a certain thing in Hart voting. 1981-82 is a big year for the Hawks. 80 games played, 32 goals, 87 assists for Savard. That's third in the league that year behind one of them is Gretzky. And 119 points, which was 6th in the league, 10th in Hart voting. Tell me about a sophomore season. 119 points. Yes, it's the 80s, but that's still crazy for a second-year player. In the playoffs, 15 games played, 11 goals, 7 assists, 18 points, and he plays in his first All-Star game. 1982-83, 78 games played with Chicago, 35 goals, 86 assists, which is second in the league, only to Gretzky. 121 points, which is third in the league, third in Hart voting, 8th in Lady Byng voting. Pretty good season, as he one-ups himself by 2 points. 13 games played in the playoffs, 8 goals, 9 assists, 17 points. He plays in the All-Star game and is also a second-team All-Star. It's the only time, because it's the 80s, that he would be a first- or second-team All-Star. And definitely got snubbed a few seasons here, especially right here, if you know what I mean. Screen goes black every once in a while for whatever reason. Let me just make sure it goes back up. There we go. But yeah, so issue with the Hawks right now. Actually, just an issue with the league. There are 21 teams currently in the league at this point, and the Norris division is bad. The Norris division is really, really bad. It doesn't really get good until the early 90s, but it's a carousel between the Blackhawks, the North Stars, the Red Wings, the Blues, the Maple Leafs. Not really the Red Wings. They're kind of the Detroit dead thing still at this point. The Maple Leafs are comically bad because of Harold Ballard. The North Stars are 50-50 every given season. So really it's the Hawks and the Blues that are really controlling the division. And so they can make it to the conference finals in back-to-back years. And who are they stopped by? 1982, it's the Vancouver Canucks. 1983, it's the Edmonton Oilers, who would both lose in the final to the New York Islanders those years. 1983-84, his production kind of drops off, but not that. It's by a lot, but because he's also scoring a lot of points. 75 games played, 37 goals, 57 assists, 94 points. His lowest total besides his rookie year. In the playoffs, 5 games played, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, as he is now in the All-Star game for the third straight year. 1984-85, he bounces back. 79 games played, 38 goals, 67 assists, which is 7th in the league that year, 105 points, which is 8th in the league that year, and the 15 games played in the playoffs as they once again go to the conference final and get smacked by Edmonton, and probably the most goals scored in a series in the history of the league. 9 goals, 20 assists, 29 points. They actually like put up a good fight against Edmonton that year. I really shouldn't say that because they did pretty well. 1985-86, 80 games played, 47. Oh, that's also his first year. He's not in the All-Star game in 4 years. 80 games played, 47 goals, 69 assists, 116 points. It's a career high in goals. He's 9th in the league with that year. Yes, 9th in the league with 47 goals. Yeah, it's the 80s. 69 assists, nice, for 6th in the league. 7th in the league in points with 116. I think the more I did this, I was like looking up the stats for this video, the more underrated I saw Denis Savard become, because I never really hear anyone talk about his name when I hear about the greats. Yes, he's in the NHL's 100 greatest players. Yes, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer in 2000, which we'll get to. But his name is kind of like Steve, like the kind of entire 80s Hawks. Steve Larmer, also very underrated, should be in the Hall of Fame. Al Secord, I'd honestly say, is overrated, but the point is, I think he's an underrated player for everything he brought. So, in the playoffs that year, 3 games played, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points. And he was in the All-Star game, of course. 1986-87, another bit of a drop-off. 70 games played, 40 goals, 50 assists, 90 points. 4 games played in the playoffs, 1 goal, no assist, 1 point. As that year, I think they lost to Detroit. 1987-88, 80 games played. He has his career year. 44 goals, 87 assists, which is 3rd in the league behind 2 guys named Gretzky and Lemieux. 131 points, which is 3rd in the league behind 2 guys named Gretzky and Lemieux. 5th in Hart voting, 5 games played in the playoffs, 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points, All-Star game. So he's had 5 All-Star game appearances to this point, and you can see he's got a lot more as you go down the board. 1988-89, 58 games played as he is injured for a good portion of that season. 23 goals, 59 assists, 82 points in those 58 games. It's the 80s. That's your excuse for the 80s. With these crazy point totals, it's the 80s. And Hawks, once again, 4th conference final run of the decade. 16 games played, 8 goals, 11 assists, 19 points. And this time it's the Calgary Flames' turn of the Smythe division to kick the Norris division's ass. So you have the Canucks of the Smythe, the Oilers in the Smythe, the Oilers in the Smythe, and the Flames in the Smythe. Not only one time in the 80s did a Norris division team make the final, and that was in 81, and that was the North Stars. Only time. 82 was Canucks, 83, 84, 85 was Oilers, 86 was Flames, 87, 88 Oilers, 89 was Flames, and then 90 even was Oilers. And then the Norris division makes its turn, and the Smythe division kind of gets bad, and then, so Hawks, once again, can't get it done. 4 conference finals appearances in a decade, though. For some pretty bad teams, like the Hawks never had a really winning record, except for 83. 83 was a genuine good year that they had. But every time else, they usually had a losing record, but made the playoffs because of 21-team league, and 16 made the playoffs. 1989-90, what was his final year in this run with the Hawks, 60 games played, 23 goals, 57 assists, 80 points, 2 points less in 2 more games. 20 games played in the playoffs as they once again go to the conference final. 7 goals, 15 assists, 22 points, All-Star game. This is a track of 4 All-Star games, but that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 All-Star games up to that point. And they lose to Edmonton in the conference final once again. Now they're under Mike Keenan. And Keenan's not the biggest fan of Savard. I mean, Savard's really good, don't get me wrong, but Keenan is thinking they need to get tougher, bigger in that case. So he goes out and he makes a trade. I didn't write the date. I completely forgot to write the date, but it's during the offseason. The Montreal Canadiens acquired Denis Savard, and the Blackhawks acquired Chris Chelios in a second in 1991, which was Michael Pommichter. Never heard of him, except for this trade. This trade is looked on as very differently by certain people. I think it's a good trade. Chris Chelios was a young defenseman at the time. As you can see, Savard's best years were behind him, and Chelios would go on to have fantastic success with the Hawks and play another 20 years, which is even cooler. But Savard, he would, of course, not win the Stanley Cup with Chicago. Chelios had already won Stanley Cups. He had leadership, and he would also win several Norris trophies with the Hawks, I believe, in 91, 93, and 96. So overall, I thought this was a very, when I look at it, I think it's a slightly tilted in the Hawks' favor, especially since they got a second-round pick out of it, but they turned it into nothing, so whatever. But I think inevitably the Hawks won this trade. But Savard ends up coming back and playing with Chelios anyway, so, I mean, Montreal gets a piece for them to win a cup, but Chicago, I thought, got the better player at the time. 1990-91 with the Montreal Canadiens, with a team he was probably originally supposed to be drafted by. 70 games played, 28 goals, 31 assists, 59 points. In the playoffs, 13 games played, 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points. He plays in the All-Star game that year with the Canadiens. 1991-92, 77 games played, 28 goals, 42 assists, 70 points. We're getting into the early 90s, scoring starting to come down. It's not at the bottom yet, but he's not the player he was. He's not the 131, 121, 119, 116, 105 player he used to be. 11 games played in the playoffs, 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points. And then the big year happens for him, 92-93. 63 games played because an injury sidelined him for a good portion of that season. How much is that? That's 19 games, I think. 16 goals, 34 assists, 50 points, so pretty good total still. This is like 93's kind of like the last year of like the live puck era. In the playoffs, 14 games played, no goals, 5 assists, 5 points. The Canadiens won and took more than 14 games for them to win the cup. Savard had a pretty bad injury. He wasn't playing in the playoffs. He did end up playing in the final. I'm not sure. I think he sat out. He gave a spot to some other people so that like they could get their name on the cup because he had already played enough and done that. I forgot who the general manager or the coach was at the time, but I remember him telling the story about how he wanted a younger guy to play so he can get his name on the cup in his spot in the clinching game, which was Game 5 against the LA Kings. And but he does get his name on the Stanley Cup. He does get that Stanley Cup overall. And so Denis Savard has something that kind of every Blackhawks legend had. You had Glenn Hall, Bobby Hall, Stan Mikita all won it with the Hawks. Esposito won his with the Canadiens as well. And now Savard's got his with the Canadiens. Keith Magnuson, unfortunately, was never part of the Stanley Cup winning team of retired numbers on the Hawks. But as you can see, somewhere along the line, legends most of the time get their cups. Maybe we can do a video on that. Maybe we can do legends who never got their Stanley Cup. 1993-94, however, the Canadiens look for a change. Actually, they don't look for a change. He's a free agent. I'm an idiot. So, in 1993-94, he signs with the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are going into their third season in the NHL. And in 74 games, he has 18 goals, 28 assists, and 46 points. No playoffs for the Lightning because the Lightning are not good yet. And if you forgot Denis Savard played for the Tampa Bay Lightning, I don't blame you. I almost forgot when making this video. 1994-95, 31 games played, 6 goals, 11 assists, 17 points before he is traded to where he should have never left. He's traded to Chicago for a 1996 sixth-round pick. Xavier Delisle, I believe is how you pronounce that. I don't know that name. And the story about him being traded back to Chicago is pretty cool, actually. Phil Esposito, brother of Tony Esposito, they were running the Tampa Bay Lightning at the time. Phil Esposito was the general manager. And he asked Denis if he wanted to go back to Chicago because they were good friends, of course. Denis played with Tony, and obviously that would have made that he probably met Phil at some point. And so he asked him if he wanted to go back to Chicago, and he just said yeah. And they only got a 6th-round pick for this legend. And what the points he would put up with Chicago after this is pretty impressive because he's already 15 years into his career. He goes back for 12 games in 94-95 with Chicago in a lockout-shortened season, remember. 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points in those 12 games when he had 17 in those 31. Also, Chicago was a much better team than Tampa at this stage. Remember, they went to the final in 92, they won the President's Trophy in 91, and of course they were in the conference final in 90. We don't talk about 93 because that's one of the... that just aggravates me. 94, another year that just aggravates me. 95, though. They go to once again the conference final. 16 games played. They lose to Detroit this time. 7 goals, 11 assists, 18 points for a 35-year-ish old man. That's pretty good for in the playoffs. And they once again lose in the conference final, though, which would be the 6th time in Savard's time with Chicago. 1995-96, 69 games played, 13 goals, 35 assists, 48 points, not too shabby for his age. 10 games in the playoffs. 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points. He plays in his final All-Star game that year. And Hawks that year, 96. Probably should have lost in the conference final, but Colorado, they choked against Colorado, and yeah, that happened. So 1996-97 would end up being his final year with the Chicago Blackhawks and final year of his career. 64 games played, 9 goals, 18 assists, 27 points. He is no longer the player he was. 6 games played in the playoffs as they are eliminated in the first round by Colorado that year. 0 goals, 2 assists, 2 points. And yeah, that would be his career. He makes the Hockey Hall of Fame in his first season eligible, first ballot in 2000. His totals for his career: 1,196 games played. Nice. 473 goals. I think that's 473. 865 assists, which is 24th all time. 1,336 points, which is 29th all time. In the playoffs, 169 games for 66 goals, which is 19th all time in the playoffs. 109 assists, which is 18th all time in the playoffs, and 175 points, which is 16th all time in the playoffs. So that's your career of Denis Savard, one of the Blackhawk greats. And yeah, so that's going to be all I have for you guys today. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Leave your thoughts down below. And you can start recommending career videos of guys who have something to do with the Blackhawks. I'm not sure if I'll do any that are just random players. For example, Mike Sillinger, who was traded a lot, very interesting career. Derek Brassard played with a lot of teams. I mean, Brassard's not officially retired yet, but those are guys that play with a lot of teams, but they never really had anything to do with the Hawks. So I probably won't do a career video on them. So if you want to recommend a Blackhawks guy, Blackhawks coach, Blackhawks something, go on ahead, and I might do that video. We'll see. I want to thank you guys once again so much for watching, and I shall see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.